one thing that defines us as human beings in the society is very much the car we drive, and I think this is something I knew from before, but I realized it even more when coming to the UK.
Yeah.
We are both car enthusiasts, but I was born and raised in France from Polish parents, and then later on embraced Islam and moved to the UK. But I really look forward to your analysis because you've been born and raised here in the UK.
Yeah.
And also, interesting fact is you have a degree in political science.
Yeah.
Which because we are about analyzing, trends in society. This conversation is a tribute, a message of love to brothers and sisters who are into cars. And I say this as someone who services my own car, who went to have an advanced driving qualification, a motorsports qualification, and does car detailing as one of my multiple jobs. So my first question to you would be, how did you get into cars, let's to say?
I mean, I suppose just from a young age, really. I was just interested from about, I would say from the age of 6 or 7 in the different models, the different specs. It was just something I got into. I know my parents always brought me model cars from a young age, and I was a keen collector of them. And my favourite for people who grew up here was I had a black Ford Sierra. I had a few Peugeot models as well. So for me, I suppose it stemmed from there. Yeah, but obviously as I got older, car culture was always a big element of popular culture. A lot of the movies and the music we consume comes from the US, and I know there's a big car culture in the US, and that goes back to the 40s or even the 50s, right? So even if you watch old movies, like I'm going back to movies set in the 1950s, even Grease, to take something very mainstream, or something like American Graffiti. If you're a George Lucas fan, you would know that was his first movie. These movies are all about car culture, which sprang in America, right? But I suppose, a lot of the hip hop music in that era, there was a lot of references to cars, customs. We had that show, Pimp My Ride. You had the Fast and Furious movies. And I suppose, there was a culture of tuning cars. I mean, I grew up in this very apartment, and our neighbours, they used to tune up old Vauxhall Astras. So for you, what got you into cars growing up in France?
I think it's kind of a similar story in the sense that I got into cars through video games.
Okay.
So my dad was an IT engineer, and he would bring home, early on, we had a computer at home, and he would bring video games. And one of these was Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit in 1998, I remember. And I think what stayed in my mind, I was 12, and what stayed in my mind, it sounds stupid, but it's the engine sound of the McLaren F1.
Oh yeah.
Because in the game, I don't know if it's real or not, but they made it sound like a spaceship when it shifts gears. And it just stayed in my mind for some reason. But then in real life, my dad, he got a brand new Mercedes 190E 1.8. And it was his pride and joy. It was his baby, and we would go to Poland from Paris with that car every single summer to see the family. And over a few years, this car would have made something like 300,000 miles. I built like a tank. And every now and then, my dad would also service the car by himself. And every time it would happen, he would bring me along and to help him with, trying to test my strength, if I could turn this bolt with the rust and stuff. And I just was fascinated about how a car works. And we had these these huge books with all the diagrams, and that they tell you exactly which part is in the car, and he would use them to fix the car. And since then it's just stayed in my mind. In France, I think in terms of general car culture, in my neighborhood, which was working class and lots of people coming from the immigration, like my parents, and so cars were relatively modest. It was lots of cheap French cars, Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, or cheap Ford, Volkswagen, or Opel, which is Vauxhall in England.
The native French people, or the ethnic French people, what was their relationship like with cars as opposed to the immigrants?
I remember that lots of French people were into tuning, and they would go for these like cheap Renault R5, and they would just add a turbo, larger wheels, wide body kits. This is things I saw on my way to high school and I was seeing on the streets. So nothing extravagant. It was, the philosophy you just take the cheapest thing and you build it up.
Okay.
One question I wanted to ask you is, what was car culture among Muslims back in the early days, in the 80s, in the 90s?
I mean, obviously I was born in 87, so some of the information is from what people have passed on, right, and conversations I've had with various uncles and people in the community. But if you were a first generation immigrant, as my dad was, and this is, I can't generalize here and say this is the Muslim experience, this is maybe the South Asian experience, right? So a lot of first generation immigrants, they predominantly had Japanese cars. So it's very common to see people with like Toyotas, specifically like Toyota Carinas that used to be a model out there, Nissan Sunnies, Nissan Bluebirds, and it was very rare in those days to see people to have prestige German cars or any prestige cars at all, or even SUVs. And the reason for, there was a number of reasons for that, because a lot of the first generation immigrants thought that Japanese cars were more reliable than their counterparts. So, British cars, which don't exist anymore, because they had like an awful reputation, bad issues with reliability, they weren't modernized, there were all sorts of issues with British cars, and often they wouldn't start. And a lot of Pakistani people, and probably Bangladeshi people as well, they felt that these cars, they were economical to run, they had cheap spare parts, and they were reliable. So it was very common just to see these family saloons around in the community, lots of Hondas, Nissans and Toyotas. What you did have though is that I suppose if you in the 70s or 80s were a second generation immigrant of that era, I have spoken to some Uncle G's who used to be into various Fords. So Ford Granadas and Ford Sierras used to be very popular. A lot of British people used to like, purchasing these cars, especially the more sportier models. And I know certain people, older people in the community have said that, they would, in the early 80s, they would have these cars when they were younger. But my dad was someone, obviously, who was a first generation immigrant who wasn't aware of car culture, like a lot of people of his generation. And they sort of stuck to, I suppose, what was reliable, what was cheap to run. So, my dad had a 1979 Toyota Carina. I think it was 75 brake horsepower, four-speed gearbox. Something very simple which done the job. My cousin graduated from university, and his dad gifted him a brand new car. And out of all the cars he could choose, he chose a silver Toyota Carina, a 1.6, and it had like a wooden sort of effect inside. Like, these days, most people would consider that to be like a Uncle G car, and some of the British agents might, understand some of these things about Uncle G cars or taxi driver cars. But in those days, there was no such stigma, I remember people being like, "Oh yeah, I love your car. It's great. It's amazing, right?" But and that was something he chose. So even people who were more well off in the community, they would, instead of having a 1984 Corolla, they would have a 1999 Carina, or they would have a newer Honda Accord or something like that. It was only very wealthy people who you saw who had a Mercedes or a BMW. SUVs were practically non-existent. No one had SUVs. Back in the day, the Japanese were making some more interesting cars. So Mitsubishi used to be making, they used to obviously make the Evolution, right? The Lancer Evolution. You had the Subaru Impreza. You know, they stopped making that a few years ago. Mitsubishi have pulled out the UK market completely, and prior to that, they were just making like electric, plug-in electric models. You know, Toyota have recently brought, I mean, after doing the Celica and stuff in the 90s, they recently brought back sportier models, and they recently brought back the Yaris GT hatch. So, you know, you did have these cars, you know, people did, back in the day, people did used to, you know, flaunt these Japanese cars. But because Japanese car makers have shifted, you know, a lot in terms of what they're producing and making, I think that's been mirrored in the community. In my early teens, sort of, I would say early 2000s, more and more people start purchasing German saloons, and especially BMWs and Mercedes, not Audi so much initially, and not Lexus and not Jaguar either. I think there was a number of reasons for that. I think, you know, obviously a lot of second generation people were sort of graduating, entering professional jobs. Their parents had sort of built up houses and property and didn't have the same financial pressures. You know, I also think that there were wider shifts going on in society. So if you look in terms of car culture, you would have some interesting models around in the 1980s. So my uncle, for example, had a 1979 Datsun Cherry Coupe, which was red. And the styling of it was, I mean, you know, it's questionable if it actually looked like a muscle car, but there were hints like in the styling. And you would get like GT versions of Corollas. I think by the late 90s, the Japanese car makers, they were just making very uninteresting, boring, very utilitarian cars, which were fine if you're a first generation Uncle G, or, you know, if you want to drive, you know, but I think for younger people, they were just seen as not exciting and very boring. So I think it was a logical step to go towards German saloons. But it's just a perception which is out there in the community, unfortunately, is that people then, because of their parents, I suppose because of their parents' working class origins, or perhaps because they wanted to escape that, and perhaps because certain cars came to be associated with taxi drivers, and, you know, people started referring to certain models as taxi driver cars or Uncle G cars. So, you know, even VW Passats became tainted with that eventually, right? But you had a lot of this going on. I think there was some people saw it as a step towards social mobility, I suppose. And I think another factor was there was access to a lot of easy credit. You know, I think PCP wasn't as widely available in the 90s, so it was not as easy to finance these cars. So that now, in my anecdotal experience, right, most British Asians tend, if they can afford it especially, or even if they can't sometimes, tend to have prestige cars, whether they're German, predominantly German. Occasionally you might see a Lexus. People consider Volvos to be a very middle class car, right? But you don't see, for some reason, many British Asians buying Volvos. I've really seen, you know, it's something associated with white middle class, like a GP or an architect, right? In Pakistan, the car market is very limited in nature. You literally have Suzuki, Toyota and Honda on the roads, and that is more or less it, unless you can afford to maybe import a German car. And I suppose the equivalent of a BMW 3 Series or Mercedes C-Class in Pakistan is a Honda Civic saloon, right? And there's this other thing in Pakistani car culture, which is effectively that how big your car is a marker of social status. Now, not in terms of an SUV, but in terms of a saloon. So people that drive hatchbacks there and smaller cars like Suzuki's is associated with being working class, or it's not associated with masculinity, right? So often you will find people that come over from Pakistan, if you were to buy a small saloon, like a small hatchback, like a Toyota Yaris, they would then think of it as a marker of being working class and not being masculine. So they gravitate towards larger cars and saloons. And I've had a few people that have come from Pakistan, you know, someone picked up a Honda Accord and they were like, I don't understand why no one wants to buy this. Like, you know, I got it for really cheap and apparently there's not a demand for this. But, you know, back home, like, you know, it's like the equivalent of a 5 Series.
Can you tell me about your first car?
Yeah, so my first car was a Toyota Corolla 1992 K-Reg model. It was a 1.6 engine. And it was something that my dad brought me when I was 17, just so I can learn to drive on. Now again, you know, because this was sort of mid-2000s, it was a car that served me well. It's not a car that I would have brought personally. But I remember saying to my dad, can I get like a German car or something, a bit more interesting? And his thing was that, the parts on that would be too expensive to maintain and run. So what was your first car?
My first car ever was when I was 26, I believe. And it's not a car I wanted. I didn't have a need for a car because I was living in London. But my mom's sister gifted me a car she didn't use anymore because she moved abroad. And it was a 1998 Toyota Previa 7-seater.
Oh, a 7-seater.
It's huge and it consumes petrol like crazy.
Yeah.
And I brought it to the UK. I tried to sell it, but nobody would want it.
Nobody wants it.
And so it doesn't really count like it. I think the first car I properly got was in 2018 after I got married. And it was a Toyota Corolla from 2005.
Okay.
1.6 liter. And this is actually a car we have chosen because we didn't need more at the time. It did the job really well.
Yeah.
What about your current car?
So my current car is a black BMW 3 Series. And it's a 2-litre diesel.
And what led you to choose this car?
It was a number of reasons really, because I had an Audi for about a good 7-8 years, and I suppose I wanted a change. And for me, one of the key things was that this car had more kit in it compared to a comparative Audi A4. So that was a big thing. Like you had leather seats, heated seats. Generally just had more kit in it. Also, I think it looks slightly sportier. Than its rivals. So, the C-Class, unless you get an AMG model or one of those models, generally, they're not as sporty. So that, I suppose aesthetics were a thing as well. And I also suppose, fuel economy was important to me as well. So, previously I had a petrol, and, the new BMWs, they're very fuel efficient, especially on motorways and stuff. So that was a big consideration as well. I did toy with the idea of perhaps going for something a little bit more different, like an Alpha. I decided against it because I think people have a perception that Alphas are not reliable. What led you to choose your current car, which I think you have a Lexus now?
So we sold the Toyota for a hybrid. That was our main intention, because the only reason we couldn't keep the Toyota was because of the road tax, which was more than £300 a year, and the petrol, of course. So we wanted a hybrid. So I wasn't against the idea of a Prius.
Or insight.
But so obviously Jab insisted for us to have something nicer. So we got for a CT200, which has the same engine as the Prius, but has a nicer exterior and a nicer interior. I've been more looking for first reliability, because when you get married, you have this sense of responsibility. You need to be careful of the costs. So my main factor was reliability. I was googling, reliability rankings for all the makes through different years, and Toyota and then Lexus, which is a luxury brand of Toyota, came on top. And something fuel efficient, of course. And I think we were very privileged to be able to afford a hybrid, because they're still, now in 2022, they're still very expensive.
They're still, they're very pricey.
And then what I got to like with Toyota and more with Lexus is the interior design and the craftsmanship. Because even the Corolla from 2005 I felt, it's solid. There is the cabin insulation from the noise and the outside is amazing.
Yeah.
It's I think it does the job very well, and Lexus brought this to another level because of the all the soft touch materials, or even like the visually how things are displayed, the lighting in the interior, and all these kind of things matter, because if this is the thing you will see in your daily, on a daily basis when you drive, you commute, and so on, these things can kind of matter. They just have good engines, are very easy to work on if you service them yourself. What was your dream car as a kid?
As a very young child, perhaps similar thing to what I have now, like a BMW. But I suppose if you talk about like a car that I would love to have, it was the Ferrari Enzo. That would have been the ultimate car. How about yourself when you were younger, growing up?
So I remember very clearly in the 2000s, my dream car was a Mercedes SL 55 AMG,
right?
The coupe, which still I find it really beautiful. You know, it's like all silver. The wheel design is just out of this world. They didn't realize the 6.3 version yet, but yeah, it was 5.5 liters naturally aspirated engine and this really beautiful design. Ironically, now, you know, with the depreciation, if I sell the Lexus, I could probably afford like one or two of these, but I'm just not interested anymore.
Not yeah.
But if I had unlimited amount of money at that time, I think again the McLaren F1, which I don't know if you saw some videos online. It costs like £10,000 a year to service because you can only service it with McLaren.
Oh, okay.
It's just crazy. And what about now? What would be your like dream car? Let's say now.
If I was to look at an all-rounder, then it would have to be something like, I suppose the M5. You know, because again, it's something that has performance. It's something. Now I have a family. You know, my family can sit in there. What would be your dream car at the current?
Now, obviously, I'm very much leaning towards Japanese cars, and for the same reasons, I would go for something like a Lexus GSF, which is a saloon, 5-liter, naturally aspirated, and it has like the engine, the nice interior, the exterior. Otherwise, it would be a coupe like the LC500, which is just beautiful. With the current climate, the fuel prices, you would need like a lot of money to go for this car. Then, all being said, I'm really happy with our current CT200, just because it just ticks so many boxes. Okay, it doesn't have the nice engine. I cannot bring it on track. But from a practical level, because it's a hatchback, it has foldable seats, the amount of things you can stack at the back is just insane. It's comfortable for long journeys. My dream would be to keep this car for life.
Generally, there's been a big shift in the last 5 years. So what we've seen is the death of a lot of saloon cars. So we know that, you know, Honda's discontinued the Accord. So Honda, if you want to buy a saloon Honda, it's not available. Nissan, perhaps 15, 20 years ago, stopped doing this. Toyota recently brought back the Camry. And I know Lexus has killed off the IS. The GS has been killed off as well. So, you know, I think they only do one saloon model now. So, and, you know, Ford will be phasing out the Mondeo, I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we're seeing this shift overall to SUVs and SUV crossovers. I think even some hatchbacks are under threat now from these SUV crossovers. So for example, your CT200, you know, Lexus have discontinued that, and now the UX is a SUV sort of mini hybrid crossover.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense to me, right? I mean, because a lot of these sort of hybrid SUVs, they can't even take them off road. They're literally just designed like that for aesthetic reasons.
I don't know if you read some reviews where people did the measurements of the inside. It doesn't gain much more space compared to a saloon.
Yeah.
The only practical thing you would get is this kind of hatchback factor where you have the fifth door at the back, and then you can fold the seats down and store more things in the boot, even in terms of safety, because the center of gravity is higher. So of course you get to see more of the road when you're sat on one of them, but when it comes to, I don't know, veering, like for avoiding something, there's a high risk of like toppling over.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, because so it's just like physics, you know. Why do people like on track they prefer cars with lower center of gravity? Because it just sticks to the road. The higher you get from the road, the center of gravity, the more like risk of like toppling the car you have.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay. The cars also appear to be expanding in size. If you compare cars from the 90s to now, a Polo seems to have grown to the size of what a Golf used to be, and I think it's just a perception in people's mind. The
most striking example is with the Mini. You remember the first generation Mini, and now the Mini Cooper.
Yeah.
It has the kind of same like shape, the same design, but if you compare the size between a first generation Mini and the latest Mini Cooper, is just a monster. The latest
it's a monster.
It's incredible.
And don't even talk about the Countryman.
Have you noticed the shift in terms of what cars people buy for status? If you go on Instagram and you look at the cars lots of British Muslim would exhibit on their feed is the stereotypical white BMW.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued because how has it become this default car you see on Instagram?
It raises some interesting questions, in relation to the Muslim community, because I suppose if I look specifically at the Pakistani community, there's a perception in society that these cars are prestigious, and I think people have just latched onto that.
Where do you think this perception of a prestige comes? Because prestige comes from the Latin praestigium, which means illusion, right? Anyone who has a BMW, they think they're standing out, but in fact they're like everybody else, unless maybe they have an M3 and M4 and M5. I've driven a BMW M4, and one thing I can see, that was for my racing license, and one thing I can see that it drives really well. It is powerful, it delivers. But why specifically German saloons? Where does this sense of prestige comes from?
People follow the herd in general as well, I think there's a lot of people who are aspiring to something, a standard that's been set, and I suppose without even thinking about it, they're just gravitating towards these certain models.
Do you think it's based on outdated assumptions? Because, well, if we talk, for example, about my dad's Mercedes, I agree, this is something solid, this is something comfortable. We would go on these very, very long trips. And back then it was one of the last of this golden generation of Mercedes, which were built like tanks, really. But now, although they come with this image, the reality is if you buy a Mercedes or a BMW brand new, they're designed, planned obsolescence, for them to last 2-3 years, the average duration of a lease, before they're not covered by the warranty anymore. Ironically, we have come to an age where brands like Volkswagen, Skoda or Dacia have even better reliability than the German saloon. It's the world upside down. Why do you think people have, I would say, clinged into this image, even though it's something from the past?
For people, reliability isn't always key. I think for them it's aesthetics, and Instagram is about aesthetics. It is about a lifestyle. I think with the first generation, obviously they had very different considerations. And I think we've spoken about this in the past, that as someone that's come over from France, you've always sort of not understood why people gravitate towards these German saloons. I think for you, reliability is something that's efficiency is something that's very important. But I think for a lot of these people, it's all about aesthetics. It's all about image. And I think that's unfortunately the era we live in. And for them, it doesn't matter if a VW or even a Honda is more reliable, more economical. For them, it is all about the image. It's not going to get them the likes. It's not going to get them the hits they're looking for on Instagram. I think what we have to think about, in terms of the British Muslim community, but specifically the British South Asian community, is that historically, as compared to the Arab community and even the Indian community, British Pakistanis and Bangladeshis have historically been very working class. And people have often grown up in very modest environments. And for them, these things are the markers that they know that they've made it, that their life has changed, that things have turned around. And they don't want to be, I think a lot of people, they don't want to be associated with those things because they see them as failures, or they see them as, this is a taxi driver. Again, this is things people say, unfortunately, that this is a taxi driver's car, this is an Uncle G's car, and for them, these are sort of indicators and markers that we have made it. And this is, I think, why people cling on to this as well.
Don't you think that this will of showing that you've made it, you've attained a certain level socially and economically, sometimes goes into overdrive? One of our friends, he was looking for marriage and talking to someone, and he went for Rishta, and he got rejected because the parents wanted someone who drives nothing less than the Mercedes, and he was driving a Vauxhall Astra.
Yeah, this is unfortunately, I would say this is a big problem in our community. What I find really ironic is a lot of these parents themselves may even be driving an Astra, or they may have historically even driven an Astra, but I think for them, I think people have just become fixated on this idea that they want what's best and what they don't want their children to go through the experiences that they went through. To drive a plug-in hybrid Japanese SUV considered something that maybe, an older person would drive. It's not considered, glamorous or fashionable, and it's not just cars. You see it with housing, you see it with incomes and salaries. A lot of people were working class. They might have lived in social housing. They might have driven these, cars which they consider Vauxhalls or Hondas or whatever. But now, even though they might still be in those circumstances, when it comes to Rishtas, they want someone that earns this much. They want the house to look in a certain way. And I think this is something which is really, unfortunately in our community, I think it's become a real problem. What the impact it's having is that a lot of people are getting married later. Obviously it's the sunnah, there's a tradition that people should get married younger. People are getting married later and later because obviously to accrue these things is not very easy. I've known a lot of marriages to break down. It's because people unfortunately are placing value on these things. The British, Pakistani and Bangladeshi, and I suppose if you want to link it into the British Muslim community, are we now moving into the territory? We're now moving into the territory of the aspirational middle class. The other angle we can look at from is perhaps, is it a thing of trauma? When you've struggled with not having much at all, a lot of people, if you're growing up in overcrowding housing, if people taunted you at school, I can remember, when I was younger, not just British Muslim or Asian kids, but other children would taunt other children. If your parents drove a certain car, there would be taunts. If they had a new Ford at the time or something, there's a trauma in it. And is this a trauma response that we're seeing in people? That accruing all of these things, showing all of these things, to think that to help boost their self-esteem.
As a thought exercise, a thought experiment, I was wondering, if our friend to the Rishta brought, let's say, a Tesla, like higher-end model, would have the parents understood?
I think they might have seen that it's a new car, and he might have got the Rishta, right? But the thing is, would they have understood it's a Tesla, or if it was a Volvo, or if it was an Alfa? They probably wouldn't have got it.
Because I had this funny experience with my parents when, after the pandemic, we visited them. It's the first time we drove the Lexus back to France. And, even though I'm over this and these things do not matter, I was low-key expecting my dad's reaction, like seeing a Lexus. Would he have appreciated like me having a Lexus, how he would find it? But when I came with the Lexus, he didn't even understand what is a Lexus.
No.
The only thing he was really proud of was when I told him that I serviced the car myself. He was more proud of that than if I had brought like...
My previous car was an Audi, right? And when I went to a car showroom where they had different brands under one roof, one of those car supermarkets. And I brought an Audi in the end, but I was thinking about buying a Lexus as well. And this comment is not what shifted my opinion. It was more to do with the engine size, because I think the IS in that era had a 2.5, and the person on the shop floor, the car salesman, when I asked him about a Lexus and an Audi, he didn't tell me about technicalities or reliability or anything. He said, "Oh mate, why?" He literally said this to me, "Mate, why would you get a Lexus? Like, who wants a Lexus? Like, if you shut up with your mates with an Audi, they'll be like, oh mate, you got an Audi, yeah. No one cares about a Lexus. Like, mate, why would you want that?" And I think it's just it's just people would not get things like that, a Lexus or a Tesla. I think Tesla, maybe there's more of an awareness because of certain celebrities buying it.
I've seen this more in the younger generation, the generation we say like below us, the younger ones, where it's associated with like the tech industry. Like it's this kind of cool factor, you know, ahead of your time in a way. A different question in terms of finance this time is, do you think PCP is screwing people over? People who have not attained financial stability would go for a nice car, which, it's amazing, you can get it for £200 a month. That's like nothing for a car. But knowing that on the long term, they would maybe spend more because of the interest than like saving for, a higher purchase.
Well, it's just that short-term thing, right? I mean, like you said about your friend with the Rishta, they purchase this car, it's going to bring them societal acceptance from their peers, from Rishta, from even their family. Everyone in the family has a nice car, and there's one person driving around an Astra. They're going to feel an immense amount of social pressure when they go into weddings, you know, whenever. So I think for them, it's just a short-term thing. But I think sometimes there can be a practical element to it as well. Like, I'm not completely against PSP, you know. If you have an older car, you know, and you're doing long journeys on the motorway, for example, and you need your car for work, like I need my car for work. I haven't got PCP, by the way, but, you know, I need my car for work. Fuel consumption with the older car is not going to be great. The road tax is going to be a lot higher. You know, if you get PCP, but then if you get a car which has next to no road tax, you know, it could work out cheaper. I think it just comes down to priorities. Like for example, for you yourself, you've always spoken about reliability, efficiency. But then if your main reason for buying a car is aesthetics and image, then I think you're not really going to care about losing a few £100 or £1,000, all these things. For you, the main thing is having that car and the prestige it will bring and the social, you know.
Why, for example, Lexus is in Europe in general, it's not really recognized as a luxury brand, or even when it comes to supercars, why this obsession over Lamborghini and not McLaren, for example? I see people buying Range Rovers on Instagram and, you know, taking nice pictures, but like 2 weeks down the line, they said they had to return it because it fails like so often, and they realized, but what did I just do, for example?
I think you can apply this logic to anything, like watches or anything. People will just gravitate towards the most well-known brand. If you said to someone that here's such and such money, a limited budget, go and purchase a watch, I bet you most people go and just buy a Rolex. They wouldn't even consider they wouldn't consider most of the other Swiss watches that are available, right? They would just go to a Rolex, and I think it's the same phenomenon because of the name and the connotations.
Why is that we see so many people going for these very these highly powerful cars, but who don't know how to drive them? You know, you see them crashing on Instagram, or, you know, they even like I watched some like more technical videos where people would tune their cars, but they would add something like 900 horsepower just to get the numbers. But on a drag race, the car is even less powerful than the stock car, because they don't know that maybe adding more weight to the car is detrimental to the performance. No. And you see people doing these like weird choices. I just wonder why. Do you have an explanation?
It's just all about image and aesthetics. I think everything just keeps coming back to that for me. You know, they don't understand that adding, you know, certain type of rims will increase weight or whatever. They don't understand that some of these cars they're buying, they're actually not that fast. They just look fast. And I think people, for them, it's just the image that they don't. And, you know, I think there's very few people out there who are proper like car nuts, who are like technically into cars or have the knowledge. A lot of people, it's just about aesthetics.
When you buy something nice, you want to enjoy it, right? It's just like, you know, even though I had a Corolla as a first car, I wanted to experiment with it because it was my really proper driving experience. The first time I had a car on my own, and I could tweak, I could do modifications if I wanted to, or I could just bring it on track, which I did. And I'm wondering, why do people with all these nice cars don't do the same things? Why they don't like work on their driving skills, do track days and this kind of things?
I mean, I think it comes down to like lived experience, right? I know you growing up, and my observation is perhaps, you know, I'm not generalizing here, but I think maybe there's a cultural element. Like, I know you growing up, like you're obviously from a Polish family. There's a real emphasis on doing things yourself, you know, learning how to construct things, take things apart. I think your dad socialized you in that way. And
this is what my dad did, but I didn't know about all this word of motorsports. I didn't even know you could, as a normal person, bring your car on track for a track day. And it is with like Googling that I found, for example, in the UK, you can get this advanced driving qualification for only £150. You can get a motorsports license for only £250, which is like nothing compared to what it allows you to do.
Yeah. In my opinion, it's just a matter of interest. I think you're someone who's very technical and very practical and that way inclined. I think with some people, again, that interest hasn't been nurtured at all. And if you've been socialised in a way where there's a lot of emphasis on external appearances, societal acceptance, what others think of you, what your relatives think of you, what your friends think of you, a lot of emphasis on earning money, but not much on sort of technical knowledge or things like that, then you will see that, you will inevitably see people who will buy these cars, but then not be interested in the mechanics.
What do you think would be the best car for escaping a police pursuit?
Where's the police pursuit? Is it
in the UK, in the urban areas?
In the urban area?
Yeah.
Probably like a Toyota Yaris GT.
Why so?
Because I might be wrong, right? But for me, it would be like, it's agile, it's small, it's fast, it has power. I'm assuming it probably handles relatively well. That's why I just went for it. I
would be tempted to think the same thing. I was thinking always, rather than these high power saloons, that maybe, if you have in a country like France or Germany where you have like motorways that go on straight for miles and miles, probably, but in an urban environment, I would go for a hot hatch. However, I've seen people crashing like Golf Rs during a police chase and these kind of things. So even though it's like all-wheel drive and all these kind of things, so maybe, if you had like a drift car, these cars modified with like wheels that goes like out of turn like much more with the camber, so it like really sticks to the road. It may be a bit more, like a Mad Max car. So, it can crash on things.
Yeah, if it was modified and if it was specifically done for that purpose. I've seen a lot of things where people are driving around in Range Rovers or Q7s. Like I was watching Top Boy, and I think in the last season there was a guy and he was like letting out the cars to everyone, and one of the cars was a Q, and in the previous season there was a shooting. I think they were driving around a Range Rover, even for like, I'm not condoning this, but even for any activity, right? If you're having a shootout or if it's a police, why would you use an SUV? Why?
Doesn't make sense.
No, unless you need to escape through a river or a mountain. Yeah. But otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and conversely, what would be, in your opinion, the worst car for a police chase?
A 1960s muscle car, because they're designed just to go straight, so they notoriously handle really badly.
The worst car would be something like a Tesla, and you know why?
Why?
Because of the kill switch. Do you remember? Like the Teslas, they have this feature where if the police or the government wants to arrest you, they can just phone Tesla and they're going to press a button and the car is just out of service.
Yeah. And on that point, actually, I think, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? But, people need to realize that the more we move towards electric cars, automation, and, with all of this technology, that this will become increasingly common. And, we can make jokes about, like, police chases and stuff, but if you then start to think about and apply this to conflict zones or areas where people are fighting for self-determination or for their rights, you could then have police states effectively using cars to severely limit people's mobility.
If I ever get an electric car, and this is one of the many reasons I didn't get one now, not only because I cannot afford and the insurance is the same price as a supercar, it's just because of that. And I don't know if it's going to be possible to see maybe in the future an open source car where, the code is freely available online, like it is to some extent with like Android, where you can just program it your way with your phone. You can just plug into the computer and program your Android phone. I'd be inclined to get something like that. Being very honest, does it happen for you to judge people based on the car they have?
If I'm honest, yeah, to some degree, I think everyone does it, right? If I see someone driving a Volvo, estate Volvo, I will automatically think this person is middle class, white, an accountant, a GP. And I think similarly, like with the A-Class, for me, that's something that a lot of Asian girls are driving. How about you? Do you?
One's perfect. I've got my own set of prejudices, but it's more, when I see someone with a car which purpose is to show off. Let's say if when I have kids and whoever wants to marry them comes and I see they have like a flashy car, like I don't know, what is this person really about? What are they trying to prove? When you go for these kind of things, either you actually have a lot of money and you can afford these kind of cars, or sadly, as you mentioned, in most cases, either you don't have a good self-esteem or ego, and this is something you use it to compensate, or other cases you may not have a very good knowledge about like cars, assets and wealth management as well. And so it's not usually a really good sign, I would say. But again, there's nice people who have these kind of cars. I'm sure of it. I just never met them. And conversely, you have people who have very reasonable cars, but are just really bad people. So
yeah, you might have someone who just doesn't. I know people who are indifferent to cars, and they might just buy something because they don't know any better. Everyone's doing it, so they just can't buy it.
I think it boils down to people's intentions and how do they justify these kind of things. Because ultimately, it's we never know until we hear the other person. Maybe they have a very good justification for that. I first try to know more about the why and the story behind the car, which is hard because we're all human. But
Have you thought about setting up an ironic Instagram page as a Dacia, like as your sort of?
You would set up satirical things only if you want to expect a response, but who would respond to someone like with the Dacia thing, unless maybe, I don't know, you're a like celebrity and for some reason you go for a Dacia and see how people react to that. I think that would be actually interesting if we can get our hands on
experiment.
If someone who is like super rich, super famous goes for the cheapest car imaginable.
What sort of reactions would you get? Take it to an Asian wedding. Take it to a Rishta, see what reactions you get.
That would be definitely interesting. So this video comes for an end. Thank you, Uzair, for your time. And as for viewers, as usual, don't subscribe. It's not a channel about cars. And until then, take care of each other. Until next time.